Yay, we have the red
Just
recording
let me
light.
know.
We are good to start.
Okay, we are recording.
Fantastic. Well, once again, it's great to meet you all. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to give you a little bit of my history here. In part, so you understand that any of you can do this. You don't need to be a computer science engineer, whatever the case might be. I'm a journalist. I'm a trained journalist. And so this is my background. Before I get too far in though, and I'm hoping I repeat this throughout, I could not have done any of this without my sources. So our subject matter experts, our engineers, our tech leads, our product managers, program managers, they've all been invaluable in cobbling together this information, getting it out. So without further ado, I'm just going to kind of hop into a bit of my history. I went to school to become a newspaper reporter, and that's exactly what I did. I've long been an activist, and so I wanted to change the world, make it better. Unfortunately, I found I was spending my time, in fact, sensationalizing tragedy, making bad situations worse. And so I ended up leaving what was a pretty decent career to get into public relations, which I did ever so briefly. I didn't really like it, and so transitioned to technical writing in 1998. And so I landed a little software company, a little startup called Home Account Network. We did financial software, predominantly written in Java. So a bunch of good folks, and I was doing online help at that point. So then I came to Excited Home, working on the at-home side, managing all of the operational documentation for at home. So at that point, I became a manager, and I was managing a team of writers, a small team. And we created documentation basically for folks who wore the pagers and answered the calls in the middle of the night when servers were down. And so similarly, I kind of transitioned over to Red Hat and worked on Red Hat Network, where now we're doing online systems administration. So now we're letting the robots restart the robots and update the software. And so that was pretty fascinating, and I enjoyed that immensely. And that led me to yet another startup called Postini. So it was a really cool place where we basically filtered mail in real time from viruses and spam, and they would send them on. That was really neat because a lot of companies don't want their mail stored for obvious reasons. So we ended up having a pretty nice clientele, and eventually we were acquired by the big G. So Google purchased us, and I came on, and I was part of what is known as Site Reliability Engineering, SRE. And so once again, a bunch of really astute folks. And these are folks also that wear pagers, and not only are they expected to restart servers in the middle of the night, but now they are writing solutions that do that for them, and identifying problems with the code and sending that back to the development teams. It's really an incredible organization with Google. I highly recommend learning more about it. Anyway, I was writing internal docs, and so for SRE specifically. And so I transitioned from there to enterprise. And so after a few years, and so spent a couple of years writing public documentation for what is now known as G Suite. So basically the admin panel for Google Apps when your domain purchases them. So as an example, if you're at a company and they're using Gmail for their company mail, they have people that oversee that, right, and set up default settings and these types of things. And so I was writing online help essentially for them at support.google.com. So 2013, I transitioned over into Android. And so I was asked to take on source.android.com, which at that point was entirely engineer driven. And it was a challenge. It was a challenge, needless to say. So a bunch of wonderful sources, as always. But the content was a bit of disarray, frankly. And so we worked really hard to get it up to snuff, started catching up with the releases, and was able to build a team, pretty substantial team of excellent writers. And we worked together to get a handle on this. And simultaneous to that, we also started taking on partner restricted documentation, largely focused on the apps that gets installed on top of Android. So source.android.com documents the operating system. This is how, say Samsung or LG want to develop an Android device. they're going to come to source.android.com and use the open source project here, grab the code. And so Google Mobile Services are the apps that get installed on top of the operating system. So Gmail and Calendar, you can see the logos here, right? Google Search, Chrome, YouTube, and all of these, right? And so we were starting to manage documentation for them too. And this was partner restricted material. And the access restrictions were quite humbling, I'll be honest with you. Because when we first kind of stepped into that, we had, content shared in a distributed manner, quite diverse manner, not very consistent. And so we wanted to bring that under control and make sure that we were being consistent with our partners and giving them single sources of information. Once again, it's always been about single sources of information. So we're taking, contents that sometimes have been copied and bringing those back together and putting those online. And so we had good success there. And so I worked in that realm for about 5 years, a little more than 5 years. And then so almost exactly 2 years ago, I hopped over and started working on internal documentation. And so I immediately saw that there was, and if you didn't hear me earlier, please hop in at any point with questions. I mean this, and I'll look over the chat window too. But definitely stop me at any point. I mean that. But yeah, so 2 years ago, I realized that, hey, there are a lot of folks that are developing these cool tools, some of which are going external. And in previous lives, they would either go undocumented externally, worst case, or they might end up in, say, a README file, which is in the code repository, but it's not easily discoverable. So as a writer, that makes me sad. So I can, anyway, I won't show you examples of it. But yes, there are examples of it, and it's fine, right? Because it's very easy for the engineer to update. So this is why I continue to kind of push this, where I need to show them that they too can update the external websites just as easily as their code. But anyway, so we try to interlink there. Navigation for READMEs is really difficult. And maybe I will show you an example. So here, I will. Let's come to another source.android.com page. This will be setup, build system. And so the Zoom build system here. And this is not to knock on them because they've done an admirable job of documenting their code. But they do this over here in this completely distinct interface, as you'd imagine. So as a writer and a writing manager, and furthermore, an organizer of content, I want to bring everything home. And so this is why I at least build wrapper pages and link into their docs and make sure that it's known as external and get those indexed and so on. But so that's kind of best case, is it'll end up as a README. But oftentimes these new tools would go completely undocumented. And so we began the efforts to start taking these public. And so the first wins were this tool A-Test here. And so it's for Android testing. And so the test folks all of a sudden got completely on board, and they're like, okay, great. We want to also, we're taking test mapping public. Let's do this the right way. And they work with me to start sifting these documents to the outside world in conjunction with their own code, right? And so soon enough, I was able to actually step out from some of this. And we've had other wins where the writing teams, the external writing teams and the engineers worked directly, and I haven't had to touch anything as an example. And so I can show you some of those as well, but I don't want to be taking any credit for that. This is where things get interesting for me personally, and that is, I realize there's a ton of testing information that's either internal. It's basically an amalgamation of internal and in READMEs, kind of like all over the place. And so I start working with the engineering teams and say, let's try to put this in some sensible order here. And so that's what you can kind of see over here in design tests. So while I was still at source.android.com, we kind of made tests a first class or at least a second class citizen, kind of moved it up in navigation so that it used to be a bit of an afterthought furthermore down the site. And so we kind of brought that in and made that a little more prominent. But yeah, we used to not really have this up until about 2 years ago, all this material. We had it in various places, and some of this was public, but maybe in, like I say, this markdown file, but it kind of tucked away. And so this was huge. And so then one of our wonderful engineers said, hey, I want to work with you to take all of this Trade Federation material public. And I said, okay, yeah, let's have at it. Because before this, there were literally only 7 pages on this gigantic test harness that were public. And it was very poorly understood, even though it's open source and folks can contribute to it in the wild, as we say, right? And so it behooves us to take that information public. So basically these pages that you see in this initial left navigation were the only pages that were public. And then all of this is new. So let's go ahead, sorry, click in here and start to show you what we did. So this engineer did a wonderful job of basically going into each internal page and annotating it and saying this can go public, or actually it was kind of we took the inverse approach, and it was like, this must remain Google confidential. So few pieces of content must remain confidential. So he took all of this material public. We worked together to refine it internally before taking it public, annotating it along the way. He flagged what must stay internal, which would usually be team specific stuff. And otherwise, all of this came directly from internal docs. And so the beauty of it is that we were able to literally take the files themselves. It ended up being on the order of, I want to say, about 60 files that we cleaned up internally. And then we did what is a G4 move over to the outside world. So basically we're able to move the files, no duplication whatsoever. And never at any point did we copy a file. We literally moved them from one content management system to another in the same markdown format, added the appropriate headers, and away we went. And so we didn't have to worry about any sort of going back and deduping and any of that. We'd split it up ahead of time. And so this was a gigantic win for us. And it's definitely, this is popular material. And it's definitely made use of the Trade Federation test harness easier. There's no two ways about it. And the engineering teams rather that support it really appreciate it as well. And they now are primary contributors to the content. They go in and create change lists to update this material, and they send that on to the writing team, the external writing team, not me. I helped get this material online, and now I'm basically out of that. And I'm back focusing on internal information, looking for the next set of material that either needs to be improved internally or perhaps can go public. I'm always looking basically through both lenses there. And so this went well. So then I start working with the build team. This is material, as I said, they still have some stuff in the README that, yes, I would like to see live natively in source.info.com. But at the same time, and this is what I say to people all the time, is let the content live where it will be updated. There's no use in moving material to an external site if the engineers are no longer going to help update it, or if you are going to lose interest in it or not be able to support it. It better stay where it is then. If it's internal and people are updating it, that's better than taking it external and now it's out of date, because now neither your internal nor your external audience can benefit. So at least if you leave it internal and people keep building it, then one day you got a more accurate source to work with. But yeah, so same here. So they definitely work with me to get all this. This is all essentially brand new. These we're transitioning from the traditional GNU make build system to something called Zoom here. And so we really didn't have any examples or anything for making the transition. And so we had some internal materials, and we worked to build those out and then move this over. And it was only by working with teams that traditionally do not publish anything externally. The build teams are often, they don't. And so, but they've done a marvelous job here. And so this is so kind of the next success, and that is we published a platform glossary. So some of these terms are little understood. And so we went out, and then we realized that we have so many sub-glossaries. And so we use this as an aggregate.
I just lost your sound, Clay. I don't know if anybody else did.
Yeah, I lost it too.
No audio.
Can you hear us, Clay?
I'm not hearing. Clay
I'm
at the
guessing
moment.
he cannot hear us because he's still. Oh, maybe you can.
Yeah, I sure
We
can.
lost your. Yeah, we lost your audio
We
for a
lost
second. You're back
we
now.
lost your
You're
audio
back now.
for a second.
Bummer. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I did not mute. I don't know. Maybe I was talking too quickly.
Yeah, maybe.
Hey,
But,
you
you
want to
know, so.
rewind and tell me what you last heard?
Oh, it was only about like 10 seconds.
10 seconds back.
You were explaining why the glossary was needed.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so we're working with external engineering teams. Say our internal engineers are working with, phone developers or system on chip developers, and they want to talk about what is a Git branch, what is a manifest file. They didn't have really a common place to share that definition. And so we took this public, and in fact, we added those terms just this past week. We can come down here and filter, go down to the build terms. And so now we have specific examples actually, and even links into the source code where we say this is a Git branch versus a canonical versus local versus a repo branch, which we have defined down here, versus repo, which is a wrapper script for Git, and so on. It's just, it can be very confusing navigating. The larger and more complex your environment, the more you're going to want a glossary, is what it amounts to. It's because you have acronyms and you have terms that, and you're always going to have people joining the fray, helping you develop whatever this is, in this case, an operating system. And so it behooves you to have that common set of terms, because they come in and people start throwing acronyms around. And you know what I mean? They have to kind of figure all that from scratch. You can ramp them up much more quickly with this.
So I actually totally agree with you. Can I just ask a little bit about what your back end is here? Like, it's really cool tech, and I'm just curious what you're using.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. This is, I did clear it with the owner of the tool today, and it's called DevSite. And it's a tool, it's a content management system that we use internally that supports Markdown and HTML. And so I can mention it. I wish I could tell you to go get it. And maybe one day that will be the case. But yeah, it's called DevSite, and it's a really fun, cool tool. It's actually the backend for all of developers.google.com. So
Thanks. It looks awesome.
yeah, thank you. So you can see other examples of it here. Yeah, definitely. So it powers most of the websites, especially the technical documentation websites at Google. It's a really cool tool. So I like it a lot. The filtering functions and all that. So this was handy. And so this gets decent traffic, as you would all imagine. And so kind of simultaneous to all of these other endeavors, I started working with one of our engineers, and I can name him because you're going to see him on a blog post in a moment. And his name is Sam. And this fellow's incredibly empathetic to our users. I love this fellow. He really tries to get into basically the same driver's seat as our user and go through the same paths to accomplish the work that we do. And it's wonderful working with him, and we have many others. I'm going to give a shout out to Ali as well, who's also been our ally in all of this. And so basically, he started writing a document called Group Name Code Lab, Group Name Android Code Lab. To which I said, hey, we don't need yet another group doc. You know what I mean? Like, if you want to go all Android wide with your code lab, I will support you to the end. Like, if you're willing to take it to the rest of the internal Android engineers as a first stop, then I'll be right there with you. Or better, take it public. And he was completely amenable to that. He's in much the same. This is why we work so well together, is he understands. To get the best bang for the buck, you're going to go through the same development process regardless. Sure, you might want to refine it a little bit more before taking it public. But if you're going to develop this thing for 10 people's use, why not develop it for 10,000 people's use? You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to go through the same hassle. Why not have more people use it? And so he gets it. And so he started writing this code lab, and I said, okay, great, I'll start supporting you. And then we started training people with it. He and I would actually sit with people, or even like more than that, we would be doing it kind of like a tech talk, as we call it, where, you know, he kind of gets up on stage and walks through the steps with people while I'm in the audience, and I'm kind of taking notes where people are struggling, and he and I work with them directly to resolve their issues. And I'm filing bugs and I'm fixing docs as we go. It's actually really fun and incredible. And so that's where this comes from here, what I like to call Hello Android. And so it's basically this starting of development. If you want to help develop the Android operating system, this is where you should start. And it's basically a relatively succinct document that goes right into the commands and gets you through it, and it links out accordingly for the information that you need. But it's the closest thing that we have to a one-pager that can get you from basically scratch to device under test, you know, having a device that's actually up and running. And this will actually enable you to create a virtual device that you'll be able to see on your screen. That's what this is doing here. And so that creates this cuttlefish AVD, Android virtual device. And so you actually be able to see this on your screen when you're all done with this. And assuming that you're at your workstation where this is being undertaken. But yeah, and so this has been incredibly well received. And kind of in a nutshell, so it was announced, it was fairly well lauded. You know, we had our Android developers folks kind of hype it up. And so it had a resulting blog post there that Twitter feed links to here. And this is the blog post. And you can say, that's why I mentioned Sam by name, is because you can see him right here. And so he and I undertook this, and, you know, it was really well received. And again, that links back to that same document that we were looking at a moment ago. And that, of course, drove traffic to the site and to that code lab in particular, but it continues to be popular. And of course, I can't get into specifics, but I can tell you this, that it gets about 2 orders of magnitude, about 100 times the traffic that the internal version does, which makes sense. And for me, this represents basically every time someone visits this, it's most likely a new operating system developer. Sure, some folks are going to come back to remember X, Y, or Z, but most of the traffic are going to be people who's never developed the operating system, which makes me proud that I'm able to kind of bring new developers in and get them up and running within a single day, is what it amounts to. That's the goal. Because otherwise we used to basically make the assumption that you read this entire site. And it's big. I used to manage it. We made it bigger and bigger. And so, but we never really had an overlay like this. And so I'm proud of this. So I'm gonna hop over here to the chat. Now I'm gonna actually hush up and just stop the monologue for a bit and like open it up to questions. Yeah, please.
I have a question. I'm interested in how you made the case for this, and then how you show results for it. Like, so before you undertook to take something public, you know, how you made the case for it, what sort of arguments you had to marshal, and then afterwards, what sort of evidence you had to show for success, like, you know, page views or what, like that sort of thing.
I love it. Great questions. Thank you. So in the run up to this, I wrote an internal documentation plan for Android, where I basically wrote kind of the problem statement of we have all of these disparate sites that are not maintained by any writer. Ergo, they're all, you know, starting to get crufty, and they need a curator. They need someone that's going to dedicate the time, because we are the core engineers for Android. This is kind of the thing is that we give internal docs short shrift when they are the foundation. So the way I depict this to my upper management is it's a bit of a house of cards to go, let's write a bunch of awesome external docs, but we don't really capture the underpinnings. And so how can you build upon that? And so I did. I wrote an internal docs plan, and I was actually pretty aggressive about it, where I sent messages to my higher ups. I kind of bring them into the conversation. And then I actually went to one of our all hands meetings, and, did the hand raising, and I go up to the mic and I'm like, hey, I'd really like to help with this, because it was starting to be kind of a bit of an outcry, even where the engineers themselves were like, help me, you know what I mean? Like, because we were growing really rapidly at that point. And it was very difficult to kind of keep saying, we don't need to work on this. And so they were incredibly supportive. The thing is that it's upon us writers to do this. They are all looking to us for leadership on documentation. The VPs and such, they're hoping that we just get it done, which they should, right? They've got a lot going on themselves. And so it behooves us to champion this and really put it in front of them and go, look, we need to work upon this. And so to kind of the second point of your your question there, and that is we do show them the analytics for sure. We show them the stats, but we also follow up with surveys where we can show drastic improvements in satisfaction in our internal documentation, and saying, look how better organized this is, the questions it used to be. And then that's and then we get into the anecdotal, or actually it's concrete as well, where we're literally in these meetings, sometimes, they're quality consults or, customer advisory board type things, where we are involved with the customer and we're able to go, okay, let me capture this and let me act upon that immediately, where our peers can go, okay, that was a confusing point and now it's fixed. And it's because this writer jumped in and made that happen. And so we do this all of the time, and it really does kind of require kind of capturing. This comes back to the whole, gathering their trust, gaining their trust from all points, right? Like some folks are going to want to see page views, right? That's what they really care about. And some folks are going to like survey results. And then some folks really want to see like the nitty gritty, the sausage factory. And that is, let's have an interview. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to, ask you a bunch of questions and draft this thing from scratch. But what I really try to do is make the processes smooth. This is what kind of comes back to what I was describing earlier. And that is, the way I operate is I write help for my people because I want them to do the right thing. And so I can't go do the right thing. I'm going to write the same email every time. Come on, I'm a writer. I'm going to write it one time, right? Don't repeat yourself. And I'm going to put that in a very public place. And I'm going to give it a short link. And I'm going to advertise that like crazy. And then I'm going to have the ability to get in touch with me right there, where it's like file a bug, add a comment, and that triggers a notification to me immediately too. And this is where we, it's a bit of hand-holding to begin with, but it pays huge dividends. So when we first started this internal site, it was a co-writer and I myself at that point, and we were basically writing about 2/3 of all of the change lists for the site. Basically doing all the documentation is what it amounted to. We've now flipped that on its head, where it's like the two of us work on about 1/3 of the change lists, and the rest of the engineers are doing 2/3 of the maintenance. And we're seeing that trend continue, where soon enough, like we're kind of reviewing, we're mostly reviewing is what it amounts to, which is wonderful because we created this is what I describe to my group all the time. You can think of it as when you first get into a documentation set, if there's nothing there, it's greenfield. And so you're kind of building a library, right? Where you're going to build shelves and you're going to have information. And so for me, I don't know how much, we're a bunch of writers. So you actually do want to hear this. Cool. Usually I'm like, this is when I start to get into it with my engineering folks, and they're sort of glaze over and they're like, please stop talking about documents. You guys actually want to hear this. Okay, so here it is. I do try to apply data as well. And so folks in my world, I've spent a decent bit of time trying to organize internal documentation sets and external. And so what it amounts to is that, so people don't want to read everything. People want to read what they need to read to get their job done, right? So hence data. And then finally, so once you take that to the internal side too, so you want to give people the same thing externally and internally, and that is the workflow. Like, where am I in this overarching process? I want to develop an Android device. Like, where am I in this? Okay, I'm working on the audio section. I'm an audio engineer. Okay, that should be pretty easy to find, I'm hoping. And I should make that possible for them, right? So internally, you're going to have that workflow, but then you're going to have all this team stuff too, right? And so what I've always tried to give people access points to is people feel comfortable publishing their team stuff. Like, they'll go crazy publishing their team stuff. They're not so comfortable going out to the process section and plugging their docs in. That's where I can really help, right? Where I'm like, hey, I saw you publish this over in your team section. By the way, the rest of Android would probably like to know about that. Can I help you bubble that up so that they don't have to drill down to your team section or search for it? Because if they don't know the term to your product, they're never going to find this. And so that's where I really feel like I can help, is I try to see that overarching view and go, let me pull this in and let me pull this in. But I'll be honest with you, it's, and I think you all know this, it's never going to be perfect. And, you know, I give myself like a B- right now. You know what I mean? Like the docs, internal docs used to be like not good. They weren't passing. They weren't passing at all. And then so a year ago, I would say maybe a C, you know, and so maybe a C plus, but I want them to be A. I want them to be A material. And so I'm going to be constantly moving in that direction. And so I literally just kicked off kind of like what we call a code yellow, where it's like, this is on fire and we need to work on this. And we're going to be working on our testing documentation. I'm going to be working with a bunch of, you know, very wonderful engineers, because we need to get a handle on this. And it's largely because I don't really understand testing very much. And so now I'm going to have to figure it out. But anyway, I'm sorry if that was a long-winded way of answering your question.
So I have a question. Are you hearing me?
I am, please.
Okay, your presentation has gone ding, ding, ding in my brain many, many times. I'm back at Google and working on a migration project. And the thing that rings my bell the most is the problem with dealing with many different teams that I have to describe basically a migration to TypeScript. And every team has their own way of migrating. And we're just at the beginning of this. I know it's going to be a very hard slog for the next year or so. And so I'm worried about this a lot, because I have experienced it before at Google. The teams don't really communicate quite very much. They are all interested in finding out about this migration stuff and how to do it, and you can't really tell them how to do it sometimes. You really can't. You can provide the basic documentation, but you can't nail it down to. And how do you deal with that? I see that you've got a kind of a split audience. Mine is internal, yours is internal and external. How do you deal with the internal part and conveying everything that you need to know? Do you have any kind of philosophy of some tips for me to follow on trying to figure out how to get basic information across to them and have them come back and look for the stuff that's more down in the weeds?
You know, great question. Great question, and definitely been there. It is a challenge. And so what I try to do is I do my best to build a coalition. What I do is I identify allies, folks who are willing to work on this problem. And then I create a group, a mailing list, and I get them all involved across the organization, whoever they may be. And I now deem them experts. I file a bug and I go, I now am naming you our testing docs experts. And so you folks are going to now help me with this issue, and we're going to plow forward. And so you get participation from folks who really want to participate and folks who don't. And I think that I just try to make it clear to all parties is folks who participate ultimately get their way. You know what I mean? Like, this is true in everything. So if you don't show up, then you can't really complain later about the outcome, right? And so this is true in life. And so I just like everything else, I try to find the common ground with these folks. And it's like, keep coming back to the root question here is, there are two things, right? What problem are we solving and what's best for our user, right? Because if there's not a problem to solve, then we're bike shedding, right? Like, we're talking, what color we're going to paint the shed. We've got to build the plant, you know what I mean? Like the proverbial. Or it's, hey, look, this is good for someone's career maybe, but this isn't good for the user. I'm not going to necessarily participate in that. Probably won't, I'll be honest with you. Like, so, and also I have to kind of question, I'll be honest with you, like always, like, is the migration useful? And then is it the right time? You know what I mean? Because we all have differing priorities, releases, for instance, and these types of things, where I want to proceed with something and it's not good for my corresponding teams. And now I need to compromise. And so always be willing to do that and just kind of understand their differing priorities. And as I was kind of explaining earlier, it has in some cases taken years to convince people to like, please let me do this. Let me do more work for you is what I'm basically pleading with them for. Let me take your material and help curate that, but it will be in a central place and everyone will know that location and they won't hopefully have to struggle to get access to it.
I think
So,
the struggle is really important because, you know, some of the things are in hindsight, it was the right call for the company to say, hey, everybody has to use ES6. I'm sorry, but if you're not migrated to ES6 JavaScript, then you're not going to be able to participate in, you know, you got to do it, basically. So, but you know, at some point, every team is saying, well, why do I have to do this? What is the reason for this? And so there's a conceptual piece that you have to put in. This is why we have to do this. And, you know, it's microseconds that are we're saving all of our search customers and things like that, you know. But it's somewhat difficult. Some people buy in right away. And others say, you know, get off my case. I'm just not ready to do this. Do you find that that you get that kind of feedback too?
oh, definitely. Definitely. You know, that's when I'm like, I'm the messenger here. I'm trying to do the right thing. So, you know, participate if you so desire. And then I'll be honest with you. I don't see myself as the sheriff that I'm going to come and enforce people to, you know, make a particular change, especially if a code change. I'll be honest with you. That's really not my wheelhouse. I'm going to come in and I'm going to help you manage your docs, but ultimately I'm going to leave it up to upper management to dictate any sort of mandate there, for sure. As I was just explaining to my manager earlier, I love her. But basically, I can't be the bad cop. These are my sources, right? It's the same thing when I was in the newspaper business. I can only poke the bear so many times. I would really get under the skin of politicians. I was young and I was like driven and I drove them crazy. And then soon enough, I couldn't get any information out of them. They loathed me. I held their feet to the fire and I busted them on a bunch of stuff. But guess what? I never got any information out of them. The ladies in the clerk room, they hooked me up, just so you know. That's just between me and you and everyone else that hears this recording. It's in the clerk house. Go there, talk with them.
I like the poke the bear thing. That really rings a bell for me.
Yeah. I mean, I live for it in a way, you know what I mean? Like I say, because I am a bit of an activist. And so I inherently don't trust politicians. I probably don't want to go all there. So, don't though.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
I have a question about whether you ever encounter any resistance in terms of exposing IP. Like, do you ever get anybody in the business who's worried about, well, if you make the docs public, then you're exposing our intellectual property and all the things related to that?
Gigantically. So when I was speaking earlier about that 1.5 or 2 years it took me to convince folks to allow me to centralize this information, that's exactly what they said, was you're going to end up exposing stuff that we shouldn't, giving stuff away. And it was really difficult to convince them. And then I'll be honest with you. I mean, I did step on my own toes some. I did create a horrific leak shortly after kind of joining Android, where I basically, yeah, you know what I mean? I did exactly as I said I you know, was trying to avoid. You know, I basically announced what I shouldn't. And so kind of learned the hard way there. So those instances did kind of prove them right in those cases. And so we really had to be cautious about, and we've better and better defined what we can say and what we can't say. All we're trying to do when we're keeping something confidential is protecting our partners from each other in a way, right? Like, because it's not fair to give one's secrets to another, if you understand what I'm saying. And so that's all we're trying to do in that regard is that we don't want to, you know, reveal anything that we shouldn't, because then it hurts them. It's not really for our own benefit in any way. And so that's why once something's released, everything should go public. And that's exactly been our mantra for the last, 7 years. And like I say, and that's just on the platform side. thankfully, the app developer side, they have been supported by writers from the onset. So since 2007, 2008, I know some of those writers, and they're still with the company. And they have long been supporting app developers. And so they've had a strong writing presence there. It was really the operating system and kind of the Google Mobile Services, the GMS part, that didn't really have full writing support until, like I say, about 7 years ago. And that was an advent. What else you got for me?
Anybody else have questions and want to jump in?
I have another one. So you made your documentation public, but it sounds like it's still authored internally. Like you haven't open sourced the contributions. Is that correct?
Well, that's a great question, Alyssa. So they used to, ironically, the source files lived in the open. And so we actually moved those internally to be part of this content management system. But at the same time, we still sync them out. We have a tool that actually synchronizes them back out to the Android open source project. So yes, you can contribute to the files in the open, and there's a README in source.android.com.
That's cool. Do you actually actively solicit contributions from the community? And if so, like, what are your secrets for getting them to contribute? That's a big hurdle I face personally.
You know, it's a mixed bag. It really is. And so you know, you're going to get all kinds of contributions sporadically, I would say. And so this is an area that we really haven't succeeded very well. I'll be honest with you. This is an area that I would like to do a lot better. And I think that we have examples. Billy Lamb, I shouldn't say too much, but yeah, Billy Lamberta over in TensorFlow has done a great job of soliciting open source contributions, I think, even more so. And so let me see if I can find our stuff. But
So Clay, sorry, it's you're saying you wish you had more contributions from the public?
yeah, I do. So what we get is, you know, we get a lot of bug reports. I would like change lists, pull requests, right?
Okay. But then
So
you have to devote resources to fielding all those bug reports.
Well, yeah, that's okay. So I'd rather get bug reports and make sure the docs are as robust as possible and certainly up to date, than turn off that feedback. So strongly encourage, you know, complete circle, basically, with your users and your sources, and obviously yourself. Actually, let's see if what we got for our README now. Like I said, I don't manage the site anymore. All these changes took place. Here we go. Yeah, we do. We have our own README for updating the website. But let me show you TensorFlow as well. This is also in the content system. I think they are actually, the person who's running this used to be on our team, and so transferred to TensorFlow. And I think he's done an admirable job of building upon what we did and making even better use of external contributions. Shout out to Billy. And so it really, I think you're hitting upon the fact that there's always a balancing act between collecting feedback and acting upon it. So we struggle with this ourselves. In fact, I kind of had to wave the flag yesterday with Sam himself, actually, my engineering counterpart, in that he keeps bringing me docs feedback, which are basically complaints, let's face it, right? And so I'm not kidding. I literally had 3 different teams share 3 different Google Docs through 3 different engineering leads with me in the same day, where it was like, docs stink in this way, and this way, and that way. And I was overwhelmed. And finally, by the end of the day, I'm like, come on, guys, you know what I mean? Like, please help me help you. You know what I mean? Like in a perfect state, like I'm saying, I would have people creating change lists. I'm reviewing them. They're putting docs in the right place. I'm making sure that everything is succinct in the appropriate order. That would be so much more efficient than basically the phishing exercise. That's often, you've all experienced this. You get plussed into an email thread that's already a sent a thread. And so now you need to read the previous 99 messages to get context, when all you've been is it's plus your name. And it's like, okay, great. And then come to find out, maybe it's a one-line change, right? But you've read hundreds, thousands of lines to do that. So in an ideal state, this is kind of coming back to the workflow that I try to design, and that is, you have the docs. I'm going to enable you to edit the docs that you're viewing right now. So I'm going to walk you through that process. You're viewing it, you can basically edit from here and explain that you know, that is possible and easy to do. And then
Looks like we lost Clay for a minute.
Yeah, looks like we did.
Not getting
It's funny
audio.
because I look frozen on his screen. So I'm like, am I frozen? Anyway.
Yep. I think there's some internet trouble happening, but we'll see.
talk to me.
Oh.
We lost you for a second there.
I think you're back
Clay, we
now.
lost you for a few
Okay,
seconds.
thank you. Yeah, I was just talking about templates, where basically I learned some time ago. I used to give, so as an example, at one of the startups I was at, I gave them a whole slew of templates, document templates. Some of them were little used, most were little used, some were used a lot. And so what it kind of
Mhm.
boiled down to me is I basically follow a ditto model, where I give everyone a team page template. You can think of this as your reference. I'm coming to your product and I know nothing about it. Who manages it? Where are the user guides for it? Okay, where's the source? So on. Like, I need a reference point for all of that, right? My list.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm gonna give them a template, right? My playbook template, right? Clarence, this is for tasks. You know what I mean? Like, hey, I'm going to do something with my tool. In between that will be the overview. This is your introduction. Like, why does this product exist? What niche is it filling? And so I give them these three, basically, only these three now. And I go, have at it. And they have decent success. And so that's kind of for me, that's kind of, I'm trying to give them as many ways to contribute as possible. One is, please go update the live site, right? Whether it's internal or external. I'm going to walk you through that and give you the precise steps. Two, next step is, hey, file a bug, right? You can just file the bug with me. You know, that's, you know, but then three, if you're really feeling crazy and it's a feature request instead of a bug, you want to create a new page, how about trigger this template, include the responding, the corresponding link from this doc that you've created in the bug, and we're off to the races. I can really help you now because you've already kind of helped spell out the problem state and the fix that you have for this. And it really can expedite things, and it gives people an avenue. And what happens is eventually, we're talking about this a moment ago, is dedicating resources to it. It's true, it's time consuming. But at the same time, it is a willingness. I was thinking about this earlier before doing this, is it does require you to become a go-to person. You have to be willing to do that. You have to be, I'm the docs person for this group. For internal Android, it's me, and so for docs, and I'm okay with that. And so I was trying to basically soften some blows earlier. My manager was sticking up for me. She's wonderful, like I said. And she's like, please just stop plussing Clay in on stuff. Just file bugs and help him. You know what I mean? Create change lists, even better, because she knows my mantra as well as I do. And I adore her. And like I told her, I'm like, and so I responded to everyone. And I'm like, it's okay. I'll file the bugs. I'll do all this. And she replied to me on the side and she's like, hey, stop being so nice. And I'm like, it's okay. These are my sources. It kind of comes back to this, is like, I've got to get this information from them. And I love that you're, she's looking out for me. She's, sticking up for me, which I absolutely adore. At the same time, I have to kind of soften that some, because I need my sources to know they can come to me at any point. And this is kind of the critical thing is that you have to kind of be willing to drop what you're working on to jump in. I get this all the time where, You know, I want to be more strategic, and I feel like I am, but at the same time, gosh darn it, if I have this engineering lead that all of a sudden wants to spill some knowledge on me, I'm going to drop what I'm doing. I'm going to drop what I'm doing because, or not, even if they're not a lead, you know, it doesn't matter. You know, I've got someone that's willing to provide feedback. I kind of drop what I'm doing. I'll be honest with you. You know, I mean, unless I'm in a meeting, I stop what I'm doing, whatever I'm working on, and I go talk to me, and we instant message or we get on a hangout. We just had a really detailed, you know, off the cuff type thing not that long ago on branching in Android. It's really complicated. And a lot of that led to the enhancements you saw in the glossary a little while ago, where it's like Sam, and he's like, hey, it's 4 o'clock on Friday. Let's talk about branching. And I'm like, okay, you know what I mean? And it's like being willing to do that. And it's okay too. And this is kind of my point. And I need to kind of also make sure everyone understands. I have my off hours, right? Like they don't ping me late at night. I mean, there was a time in which I did all that. There's a reason why I got out of management. It's because I did a lot of that round the clock stuff, and it's exhausting. And I wanted to write again, and I really felt like I could help there. So making yourself available and making yourself and not carving out your own time is not fair, right? Like, so people understand, you know, people understand working hours, and it's okay to say no. But yeah, I do. I try to make myself available. I love my team. I'll be honest with you. They make me proud.
Someone want to jump in with another question here? The memorable last question of the evening. I see our group is dwindling already. If not, if someone's just building up the courage, they can break in. But if not, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I'm going to start by thanking Clay Murphy for this tremendous talk, which I've been looking forward to probably longer than anybody, because I think we started talking about at least 6 months ago. And so thank you at long last for joining us. And this has been great. It's gone so many unexpected and interesting places. So
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you all for joining.
Yes.
You're all extremely dedicated to be here in the evening online talking about documentation. So I love talking with you all. And it's very easy to get in touch with me. So my personal email address is just clay.murphy@gmail.com. Straightforward. So hit me up. I offer whatever advice I can, and happy to receive advice. So especially on public speaking, which is not exactly my forte.
Okay. Yeah, I also wanted to thank everyone on behalf of Write the Docs SF Bay Area for coming out tonight, especially with so much going on right now, including that we somehow managed to schedule this during a presidential debate, which I was afraid would leave us all alone in here looking at each other. But thanks to everyone who showed up, and thanks Elisa, and all the organizers who pulled this together despite technical difficulties.
Well, and thank you to
challenges tonight,
Android
'cause-
for making it so that I could at least start the meeting, right? It's kind of appropriate,
Yes,
isn't it?
so it's another win for Android, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and let's see, and I do need to do our traditional check on whether we have anyone who wants to talk about